It was one of those rare mornings on the ranch that felt like a slice of heaven, quiet, still, peaceful. The kind of morning where the breeze feels cooler, the grass looks greener, and everything just seems to move slower. My daughter Ellie, just 10 years old, had already finished her breakfast and was out near the west fence line riding her pony. Star, she had been practicing her barrel turns between the fence posts, her laughter ringing through the crisp morning air. The sun had just crept over the hills, brushing a soft golden hue across the land. From the porch I watched her, carefree and happy, the way a child should be. Birds chirped from the sycamore trees nearby, and our old dog Tank lounged on the porch beside me. Everything felt calm, but calm doesn't last long when you live next to her. Her name's Karen, and she wasn't just any Karen. She was the president of the HOA from the development that bordered the south side of our ranch, a gated community of identical houses, well-trimmed hedges, and people who think the world revolves around bylaws, newsletters, and noise ordinances. Karen had taken it upon herself to patrol her neighborhood, and apparently anything she thinks belongs to her neighborhood. And right around 9:02 a.m., the calm shattered. I heard the unmistakable screech of high heels on gravel. Karen, in her usual pristine white tennis outfit, her sun visor tilted just right, storming up our driveway like she had just discovered a federal crime scene. I stood up. Her phone was already in her hand, her other arm flailing wildly in the direction of the west fence. She's trespassing again. I've told you people. A child is riding on HOA property. She was pointing at Ellie, who had now stopped mid-turn, confused and nervous. I walked down the steps of the porch, slow and steady, trying to calm my pulse. "Karen," said voice low and firm, "you're yelling at a 10-year-old. What's going on here?" She didn't even look at me. Her eyes were locked on Ellie, and her voice grew shrill. "Don't act like you don't know. That land near the fence belongs to the HOA. It's part of our protected green space. Your daughter has no business being near it, and if she isn't off it in 5 minutes, I'm calling the sheriff's department." I blinked. "Karen, you're on my property right now." She laughed. Not a happy laugh. Sharp, mocking cackle. "Please, I have maps. The HOA has boundaries. She's violating them, and I'm filing a report." I turned to look toward the fence. It's the same fence that my family had maintained for 3 generations. The same fence line marked with surveyor stakes we paid good money for just last year. The same stretch of land clearly noted as private ranch property on every single piece of documentation I had in my office drawer. But Karen didn't want to see any of that. She didn't want evidence. She wanted drama. She wanted control. She jabbed her finger at the air again, this time more aggressively. 5 minutes. If she's not off that horse and off that land, I'm calling 911 and telling them a child is in danger on restricted property. Now, I've dealt with a lot in my years, as a rancher, as a father, and especially as a sheriff. But never had I seen someone so dead set on enforcing a rule that didn't exist, and land that wasn't even hers. And never had I seen someone willing to weaponize the police over a child on a pony. I looked her square in the eye. "Karen, I'm warning you now. You're overstepping." She crossed her arms. "So are you, and I know people. I know your boss." I bit my tongue. I wasn't about to blow my cover just yet. I wanted to see how far she'd take this, how far her arrogance would go. Ellie, meanwhile, had slowly started walking Star back toward the barn, sensing the tension. But Karen wasn't satisfied. She needs to be removed. "That child is breaking the law." She was already on the phone. "Yes, 911. I need immediate assistance. There's a child trespassing on protected HOA property, and the adult present is refusing to intervene." Yes. Near the west lot line, adjacent to Silver Pine Circle. The man is being confrontational. She glanced at me and raised her eyebrows, as if daring me to stop her. I didn't, because here's the thing. Karen didn't know who she had just called. Karen didn't just think she was right. She believed it like it was gospel. Worse, she thought that by yelling louder and dialing 911 faster, he'd force the world to bend to her delusions. I stood silently while she finished her 911 call. pacing in small circles like a watchdog who had found a rabbit on the loose. Her voice was loud, clear, and full of fake urgency. Yes, the child is trespassing. No, I don't believe they have permission to be there. And yes, the adult is refusing to remove her. He's being combative. She looked at me when she said combative, like she was daring me to react. I didn't. I just watched. Karen ended the call with a sharp thank you, then turned to me with a smug smile on her face. You could practically see the gears turning behind her eyes. She thought she had one. You've got 5 minutes, she said coldly. Then the sheriff's office will be here, and I'll make sure you're charged with obstruction.
I took
A long breath and folded my arms. Obstruction of what, Karen? If you threatening a child from 10 feet over a property line you don't own? That's not your property, she snapped. I have seen the HOA boundaries. That greenbelt was meant to be preserved. That greenbelt has been in my family since the 1950s, I said. It was never part of your neighborhood. In fact, the only reason your HOA stops where it does is because my grandfather refused to sell this land to your developer when they built that cookie-cutter box community you live in. She stepped closer, her face tightening. You people think you're above the law just because you have a ranch, but in an HOA, we follow rules. That's how society stays civilized. I tilted my head. You think society is civilized when a grown adult calls the cops on a child riding a pony? She didn't answer. Instead, she pulled out a folder from her oversized purse and began flipping through papers. She clearly didn't understand. These are documents from our HOA board meeting. This map right here, she held up a photocopy with poorly drawn red lines, shows the border, right along this fence. Karen, I said, trying not to lose my patience. You're holding a map someone printed off Google with Sharpie? Lines drawn on it, that's not legally binding. It's official. She barked. I was done arguing logic with delusion. Now here's the part you need to understand about people like Karen. They don't want to be right. They want control. It wasn't about the fence. It wasn't about the pony. It wasn't even about Ellie. It was about authority. And when they think you're beneath them, they'll use any tool they can. Rules, threats. The police to put you back in what they believe is your place. She looked at her phone again, checking the time. They'll be here any minute, she said with a smirk. I suggest you move that child. She's still on that horse when they arrive. I'll have her removed. I couldn't help myself. I chuckled. Karen bristled. Do you think this is funny? Oh, I think it's hilarious, I said. She glared. You think they won't take her? You think they'll side with you? At this point, Ellie had dismounted Star and walked the pony back toward the barn, shaken but safe. She didn't understand why the lady next door was yelling at her. All she knew was that something bad was happening, and Dad was keeping it under control. I turned back to Karen. Let me get this straight, I said. You think a child on her own family's ranch can be forcibly removed by police because you decided this land belongs to your HOA? Yes, she said flatly. And they're going to make sure you both face charges for trespassing and defiance. Defiance, I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Is that an actual charge, or one you just made up in the car on the way over? Her lips curled. Mocking me won't save you. Karen, I said, stepping closer so she could hear me more clearly. You called 911 over a fence line dispute you don't understand? You falsely claimed a child was in danger. Accused me of being confrontational. Now you're standing on my land yelling threats. She didn't even flinch. Then prove it. When the cops get here, let's see whose name is on the map. Arrogance was astounding. The entitlement was limitless. But what she didn't know, what she still didn't realize, was that the officer she called, the deputy she expected to show up and remove my daughter from our land, that deputy was me, and I was on duty that morning. I walked past Karen without another word. Heading toward the barn to check on Ellie, I could hear Karen behind me still, talking to herself, rehearsing the moment in her head where the officer would arrive and hand her justice on a silver platter. But justice was about to look very different than she imagined. Karen stood near the edge of the gravel road, arms crossed, lips pressed into a smug grin, as she waited for what she thought would be her victory lap. The sound of a vehicle approaching made her perk up. She actually smoothed her hair and straightened. her visor like she was getting ready for a photo shoot with the cops. A county sheriff cruiser rounded the bend of the road, dust kicking up behind the tires as it slowly approached our front gate. Karen practically leaped forward like she was about to receive an award. "They're here," she said, almost giddy with excitement. She looked over her shoulder at me, a satisfied sneer on her face. "Better prepare your excuses. Sheriff's Department doesn't play around out here." "Oh, I know," I said calmly, hiding my smile. The cruiser rolled to a gentle stop in front of the main drive. Karen ran toward it like a child on Christmas morning. She tapped on the window as the engine idled. "Officer," she called, "thank goodness you're here. The child is still somewhere on that pony near the fence line, and this man has refused to comply with my demands. He's aggressive and confrontational, and I fear for my safety. You need to take immediate action." The driver's side door creaked open. Heavy boots hit the ground. Karen's eyes narrowed with confusion for half a second, until she saw my badge, and then her mouth dropped. Wait, you," she stammered. "That's right," I said, as I adjusted my duty belt. "Sheriff Wade Dawson, elected 2 years ago. The guy you called." The blood drained from her face. She looked back at the cruiser, then at me, then at her phone like she had entered the twilight zone. "No, this isn't right," she mumbled. "I called for backup. I called for real law enforcement." "Then congratulations," I said with a smirk. "Got the top law enforcement officer in the entire county. That's me." Her voice cracked. You can't be both the sheriff and the man being reported." "Karen, you didn't report a crime," I said, stepping forward with slow authority. "You filed a false emergency call over a situation you created, involving a property you don't own and a child you tried to intimidate." Karen's panic turned quickly into defensiveness. "I was protecting HOA property," she insisted. "She was on our green belt. Your daughter was trespassing." I pulled out the property file I kept in the front seat of the cruiser. It had our updated survey maps, official deed paperwork, and every inch of border registered under my family's name. I held it out here, I said. "This proves that the land in question is Dawson Ranch property, purchased in 1954, and maintained by us ever since. That fence, we built it. That barn, we own it. Those trees, planted by my grandfather. Your HOA has no jurisdiction over this land." She refused to take the folder, folding her arms tightly instead.
"All I saw
different maps at the HOA meeting." "Then either those maps are wrong, or someone's lying to you," I said. "But let me be absolutely clear. You've now committed 2 offenses. First, you trespassed on private land. Second, you made a false report to emergency services claiming child endangerment when none existed." Karen's voice dropped to a squeak. "I didn't mean it like that." "But you said it," I interrupted. "You used 911 as your personal HOA enforcement line. You called for an officer not to report a crime, but to assert power over your neighbor. It's not how this works." I paused for a moment, letting that truth settle into her bones. "Do you know what happens to people who abuse emergency services, Karen?" I asked gently. She didn't answer. I leaned in just a bit. "Fines, civil liability, some cases jail time, especially when it involves false accusations against minors." Karen's smug expression had crumbled completely. Her voice was small now. I didn't know she was your daughter. Would it have mattered?" I asked. She hesitated. I thought if I pushed hard enough, someone would listen. "Well, someone did," I said, walking a few steps past her, surveying the scene like I would at any call. "And what I see is a neighbor who went too far, who stepped onto someone else's land to enforce rules that don't apply, and who frightened a 10-year-old girl over a dispute that could have been handled with a polite conversation." Karen opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her hands trembled slightly. I took a deep breath and gave her one last chance. "You're not under arrest," I said, "yet, but I suggest you leave now. And if you ever approach my daughter again on this property, or anywhere near it, handle it formally, and it won't be a warning next time." She nodded quickly, not even making eye contact. "And Karen," I added. She turned. "Take your HOA maps with you. They don't belong here." She left without another word. The moment her car disappeared back into the HOA's cookie-cutter neighborhood, I walked toward the barn. Ellie was brushing Star down quietly, her little hands moving in soft, familiar strokes. "Hey, sweetheart," I said gently. She looked up. "Is the angry lady gone?" "Yep," I said, crouching down beside her, "and she won't be coming back." "Was I in trouble?" she asked, her eyes wide. "Not at all. You were perfect. You were on our land, doing what you love. There's nothing wrong with that." She smiled and hugged Star's neck. In that moment, I realized something important. Karen hadn't just tried to control land or rules. She tried to steal peace. She tried to use fear to bend reality to her will. That's exactly why people like her need to be reminded calmly, firmly, and legally what real authority looks like. The days after the incident were unusually quiet. For once, there were no early morning HOA complaints slipped under my front gate. No mysterious violations taped to my mailbox, and no Karen stomping across the boundary line screaming about ordinances and neighborhood bylaws. It was almost peaceful, almost. But anyone who knows people like Karen understands they don't go away quietly. They retreat, regroup, and wait for another opening. That's why I wasn't surprised when, 3 days later, a certified letter arrived from the Silver Pine Estates HOA Legal Committee. It was addressed to Wade Dawson, a resident of adjacent property, which already told me how this was going to go. They weren't acknowledging me as sheriff, just a neighbor, nuisance, a line item in their monthly drama. I opened it carefully. Inside was a formal letter, complete with HOA letterhead, alleging that I had been hostile, that I interfered with HOA oversight, that a child under your care was witnessed engaging in unauthorized activity on shared Greenbelt property, triggering concern for safety and compliance. The kicker? They wanted a meeting on their turf, in the HOA clubhouse. With their board, you'd think after being corrected by the highest law enforcement officer in the county, they'd reconsider. But that's not how people like this operate. They believe power comes from paperwork, not principle. I wasn't going to let it slide, not because I wanted to prove something to them, but because my daughter deserved to grow up without people like Karen rewriting the truth around her. So, I responded with a little letter of my own, typed, official, stamped with the county sheriff's seal, informed the board that any further false accusations would be treated as harassment. I attached the deed, the survey maps, and a notarized affidavit showing that the Greenbelt in question wasn't theirs. I also informed them that if another emergency call was placed from their HOA over a civil land misunderstanding, I'd launch a formal investigation into misuse of emergency resources. And then, it's just for good measure, I included a copy of the Sheriff Department's Community Conduct and Boundary Law pamphlet highlighted in yellow at the line that read, "Calling 911. To resolve personal disputes as grounds for civil penalty or prosecution." It was signed, Sheriff Wade, Dawson County Law Enforcement Division, Dawson Ranch. 1954. I mailed it and waited. A week passed, then 2. No more letters, no more screaming. Most notably, no more Karen. Until one morning, around 7:30 a.m., I saw her not storming down my driveway, not yelling over the fence, just standing on her own front lawn, arms crossed, looking at my property. I nodded from the porch. She gave a tiny wave, barely a twitch of her fingers, and turned away. That wave wasn't friendly. It was surrender. She knew. Everyone in that HOA knew. The rumors had spread fast. That rancher is the sheriff. He carries the law badge and the land title. He made Karen back off without even raising his voice. And that's when something strange started happening. The same HOA that once barked at me through letters started asking questions. They'd show up at my fence, soft-spoken and respectful. "Hey Wade, what's the best way to keep deer out of our garden? Mind if we ask where you get your gravel from? It lasts longer than what we use. Do you have the number for that tree guy?" It was subtle, but it was real. The same people who once viewed my ranch as some backward eyesore now treated me like the town elder. One afternoon, a guy named Mitchell, younger board member I'd only seen once or twice, came by. "Hey, Sheriff Dawson," he said sheepishly, holding a clipboard. "We're revising the HOA guidelines, and we were wondering if you'd be open to reviewing them, just to make sure everything lines up legally." I looked at him for a long second. "Sure," I said. "Bring coffee next time." Ellie never heard from Karen again. She kept writing Star every morning. Her confidence came back fast, but I noticed she stuck a little closer to the barn for a few weeks after the incident, just until she knew things were safe again. One day, while brushing Star down, she asked, "Daddy, why was that lady so mad?" I paused and knelt beside her. "Some people get confused about what's theirs and what's not," I said. "They think rules give them power. But rules without kindness don't mean much." And sometimes, people try to scare others just because they think no one will stop them. She looked thoughtful. "But you stopped her," she said. I smiled. "Not just me, you did too." She tilted her head. "Me? You stayed calm, you didn't yell, you were brave. That's the kind of strength some adults still haven't learned." She grinned and hugged Star. A few months later, during the county fair, something happened that still makes me laugh. I was judging a 4-H livestock show, part of my role as sheriff and community liaison. Ellie had just shown her goat, which won second place. She was walking proudly back to the stands when I heard someone behind me clear their throat. I turned around. It was Karen, not in tennis clothes. No sun visor. Just a simple blouse and jeans, holding a paper plate with a slice of pie on it. "Sheriff Dawson," she said, eyes avoiding mine. "I wanted to say thank you for not pressing charges, for not making a bigger deal." I nodded. Slowly, she looked down at the pie. "And I figured you liked apple with cinnamon." I took the plate and raised my eyebrows. "Karen," I said, "you just bribing me with fair pie?" She chuckled nervously. "I guess I'm saying sorry I didn't say anything right away. Just offered a small nod. I said. "There's room at the table for people who want to live with their neighbors, not above them." She looked surprised, then nodded. "I'll try," she said quietly. "I really will." And for once, Sai believed her. Final thought for the viewers. You see, the law doesn't have to come with sirens and handcuffs. Sometimes it comes with calm words, quiet strength, and a reminder that power means nothing without principle. Karen learned that the hard way, but at least she learned, and out here on Dawson Ranch, we ride free, we stand our ground, and no HOA rules are strong enough to shake tea.